Hi, welcome to today's symposium on Olga de Amaral. My name is Stephanie Seidel. I'm the Monica and Blake Grossman curator here at ICA Miami. Thank you so much for joining us today. The program today accompanies our exhibition Olga de Amaral, presented in collaboration with the Fondation Cartier pour l'Art Contemporain, which is co-curated by Marie Perennes, who's one of the speakers today, as well as myself. And we're really thrilled to deepen the conversation about the work of such an exceptional artist we're honored to present here at the museum. Olga de Amaral doesn't really need an introduction, but I will still give you a few rough dates, and you will learn much more about her throughout this afternoon. So Olga de Amaral was born in 1932 in Bogota, Colombia, where she continues to live and work today. She studied architectural drafting in Bogota, as well as textile design at Cranbrook Academy in Michigan in the 1950s. And over the past 7 decades, she's sustained a unique and really outstanding artistic practice. She's a singular voice in Latin American and textile art who really pushes boundaries of fiber art, blending weaving, oh my God, I'm so sorry, blending weaving, knotting, and braiding to create striking, abstract, three-dimensional forms. Her work really complicates narratives of modernism and craft, and she forges a unique sculptural language that draws from Bauhaus modernism, constructivism, Colombian abstract art, and indigenous weaving traditions alike. All of these aspects you will hear more about today with our wonderful 4 speakers that I will introduce shortly. The exhibition that you can still see at our main building, just down the street, 2 buildings over, premiered in Paris at the Fondation Cartier pour l'Art Contemporain and is still on view here till mid-October, including 50 works across 6 decades, really showcasing the breadth and depths of Amaral's practice. The exhibition architecture for our show, as well as the Paris show where the exhibition premiered, is designed by French-Lebanese architect Lina Gottme, who created a really unique scenography for Olga's works inspired by the idea of the vertical forest that really resonates with Miami's tropical landscape. If you haven't seen the exhibition yet, I'll invite you to walk over either in our coffee break, or the museum will be open actually till 7 p.m. today, exceptionally for this event. So if you want to go over there after this event concludes, you're more than welcome. Without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome and introduce our 4 speakers today, all experts in their field, and we're so thankful you made your way here to Miami to join us today. The first speaker you will hear is Elissa Auther, Deputy Director of Curatorial Affairs and Chief Curator at the Museum of Arts and Design in New York. She's the author of the landmark study, String, Felt, Thread, The Hierarchy of Art and Craft in American Art. I would now like to welcome Elissa Auther from the Museum of Art and Design in New York with her presentation, Contrapuntal Play, Olga de Amaral in Context.
Thank you, Stephanie, for the invitation to participate in this symposium. I'm really honored to be here. And congrats to everyone who's involved in realizing the Olga de Amaral exhibition. It's just stunning. In the 1960s and 70s, Olga de Amaral played a prominent role in the emergence of what would come to be known in the US as the fiber art movement, or in other parts of the world, the new tapestry movement. In these circles, fiber was promoted by a network of artists, curators, and gallerists as a medium of fine art rather than craft, with the same aesthetic autonomy and intellectual gravitas afforded modernist painting or sculpture of the period. This was a revolutionary claim for artists working with fiber, a medium historically associated with the applied or decorative arts, interior decor, commercial textile design, women's domestic labor, or amateur craft. And in this presentation, I'd like to map out Amaral's evolution as an artist within this movement from the mid-50s through the 1970s. And I'll say at the outset that our second speaker, Cristina de Leon, is going to cover much more about the artist's involvement or career as a textile designer. And I'm going to kind of rush through that part in the 1950s. So don't worry, if I'm going too fast, she's going to pick up. The thing I really want to share with you is how her career represents an ideal case study of the complex and overlapping educational, professional, and institutional context crucial to the repositioning of fiber as a fine art medium in these decades. And with these photos, I'm just representing parts of Amaral's practice, material and techniques of fiber and weaving. You see her at the loom on the left, and the conceptual exploration of pattern and structure that she very expertly keeps in play throughout her career. Given the modernist prohibitions of the time toward textiles, weaving, and the medium of thread, what Annie Albers often called, quote, the stuff the world is made of, end quote. Artists of the fiber art movement, Amaral included, struggled for credibility in the high art world. Today, the same aspects of her career that were once a liability can be more generously perceived as essential to her creation of a rich and diverse practice that was way ahead of its time as it moved across and between the fields of design, craft, art, and architecture. Amaral was introduced to weaving in 1954 at the Cranbrook Academy of Art in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, right outside of Detroit, where she had been admitted to the graduate program in textiles as a special non-degree student. And on the left, I'm just showing you here the school's campus in 1958, a few years after she was there, and then the weaving studio from a much earlier period in the 1930s. I find the details of how she ended up at Cranbrook to be interesting, as they represent the first of a series of overlapping contexts that shaped her artistic evolution. In Bogota, Amaral attended the Colegio Mayor de Cundinamarca, established in 1945 with the initiative to bring women into the workplace. Within the college, teaching in the creative spheres was characterized by a Bauhaus-inspired curriculum that placed equal value on art, design, craft, and their associated trades. For Amaral and her fellow students, this created a place for the study of fine art through degree pathways that promoted professional artistic possibilities. In other words, in this context, art was freed from the rarefied realm of the museum or gallery through an alignment with design and craft. At the school, Amaral pursued design and architectural drawing, graduating in 1952. She spent a year employed as an architectural drafter and designer, and the following year returned to the college to direct the design faculty. She was encouraged by a colleague in Bogota, an architect, to apply to Cranbrook. As she recalls, he told her, quote, "It was more than a place to study design and crafts. It was a place that valued freedom," end quote. Her previous training in design and architecture positioned her well within Cranbrook, which emphasized design and experimentation in a focused, studio-based learning environment. Under the leadership of Eliel Saarinen, the school's master planner, architect, and first president, students were encouraged to experiment in aspects of design across multiple fields and media from a home base rooted in a specific medium that was presided over by a single practicing artist. So for instance, the weaving studio at Cranbrook, when Amaral arrived, was directed by the Finnish textile artist Marianne Strengel, and I'm showing you here on the left at the loom, and on the right, a photo of her weaving studio at Cranbrook. Strengel was brought to Cranbrook in her role as a designer craftsperson, and she conceived of hand weaving as a preparatory step to machine production. For Strengel in the Detroit, Michigan area, this could mean securing upholstery contracts with the auto industry or working with architects to design fabrics that complemented the clean lines of modernist interiors. So in the context of Cranbrook, when Amaral was there, hand weaving was embraced as an applied art and a dependent expression, and Strengel modeled for students the professional identity of the weaver at this time. Under her instruction, students in the program learned to weave, and they produced portfolios of small sample-sized textiles that could go into production, demonstrating their design competence. And I'm showing you an image from the graduating class. This is Amaral's graduating class exhibition from 1955, and her woven textile samples appear on the left of this photo in this grid, and she's exhibiting here with the students from the ceramic studio. Following her graduation from Cranbrook in '55, Amaral returned to Columbia with her loom and opened her own weaving studio, designing custom fabrics for interiors, furniture, and fashion, which she ran with her husband, Jim, for a certain period of time. He was also a graduate of Cranbrook who designed furniture for their creative enterprise. And I know Christina's going to talk more about this, so I'm just showing you a sampling of some custom fabrics and an image of her fabulous caftan line here. The business was successful, with Amaral reporting in the 1960s in an American magazine that was called Hand Weaver and Craftsman that she was operating with 15 looms and 15 employees that she had trained to weave in the studio. In 1964, this is where I want to get to. In 1964, Amaral took a year-long trip to the US, and it propelled her work in a new creative direction, away from her role as a weaver and textile designer. Although that was not, she certainly didn't walk away from it. She was looking to expand her practice, let's say. In San Francisco, she met with fellow Cranbrook contemporary Lillian Elliott, who had spent time as a textile designer in the Detroit auto industry after graduating. I'm showing you two works here by Lillian Elliott, and on your left, a piece from 1968 made out of card weavings. It's a type of ancient form of weaving that's portable, that is made with small cards, and you create these band structures with tassels. And then on your right, a basket that is very roughly sutured out of rattan, care chaining and black thread. That's from a later period in 1986, but Lillian Elliott was at the forefront of a group of artists experimenting with the basket form as a type of fiber sculpture. On this trip, Amaral sought Elliott's advice on creating a studio practice that was characterized by individual experimentation outside the commercial textile market. And she had come to the right person. After leaving Detroit and resettling in the Bay Area, Elliott became part of a community of artists developing fiber as an autonomous medium of sculpture rather than working for industry or running a custom textile studio. And in an oral history from the 1980s, Elliott recalls praising Amaral's vibrant use of color and encouraging her to develop her own tapestry practice. Ed Rossbach, another fellow Cranbrook alum who had studied under Strangell in the 1940s, was also working in the Bay Area at this time. I'm showing you a knotted net piece from 1965 in a colored raffia, and then also a basket form out of raffia. And so both he and Elliott kind of led the pack when it came to experimentation with working off the loom or in very alternative forms of loom weaving, and they were both central to the revival of basketry as an expressionistic sculptural form. Rossbach directed the design department at the University of California at Berkeley, and it was he who recruited Elliott to teach fiber-related courses there. Under his leadership, courses veered away from an emphasis on weaving as an applied art or the designer-craftsman model set by Strangell at Cranbrook. In an article Rossbach wrote about the fiber history of the 1940s and 50s, published in American Craft magazine in the early 80s, he alludes to his time at Cranbrook and his subsequent rejection of the loom by writing, quote, "That whole phase of hand weaving as a preparatory step to production, you wonder what in the world all that was about," end quote. Now, there's no evidence that he met with Amaral that I could find, but his presence was everywhere in the Bay Area, including in Elliott's studio. They owned each other's work, so I would not be surprised if she also had some encounter with Rossbach while he was there. And then I also know that he put his students in touch with Amaral if they were planning to study study trips in South America. So I think they were part of this same network. It's really interesting to think about how Rossbach, Elliott, and Amaral's reorientation away from the loom and the designer craftsperson model they were professionalized to adopt at Cranbrook highlights a conflict at the heart of craft-based education in the US. Within the Bauhaus-inflected curriculum at the school, a built-in opposition between commercial and expressive impulses seemed to prevail. And this could have been also even been at play at the curriculum at Amaral's college in Bogota as well, which was similarly Bauhaus-inspired. In this conflict between an individualist, art-based model, which promoted the preservation of personal expression through experimentation, and the pedagogical goal of the time of appealing and conforming to the needs of industry, the art-based model seems to gain the upper hand in the late 50s and 60s. And this resulted in the reorientation of many weavers away from design towards gallery-based art in three-dimensional form. And Amaral's work represents a very prominent example of this reorientation, as we'll see. Now, the timing of her 1964 US visit couldn't have been more ideal. The previous year in New York City, the Museum of Contemporary Crafts, what is now the Museum of Arts and Design in New York, mounted the group show Woven Forms. I'm showing you the catalog cover here. Curated by Paul J. Smith, the exhibition showcased the work of 5 weavers experimenting with radical new approaches to thread. All 5 were at the beginning stages of thinking about how to move the woven textile away from weaving and industrial textile design to autonomous sculpture. And I want to spend a little bit of time looking at this exhibition and its artists, because the show was groundbreaking as the first curatorial effort in the US to focus attention on the work of weavers, making radical moves away from an understanding of textile or weaving as an applied practice or a form of interior decor. So we'll just take a look at some of the images from the catalog. Sheila Hicks and Lenore Tawney were debuted in New York City with this work. You can see examples here. They go on to be sort of leaders of the pack that included Amaral and also Claire Zeisler. I'll show you. Here's Zeisler on your left, Alice Adams. They're all doing really, really interesting manipulations of fiber, sometimes on a loom, sometimes partly on and off the loom. And then Dorian Zaki, who is making these very unusual shaped weavings. And I have a few installation shots that I found in the Museum of Arts and Design's archive. So a large part of the exhibition was given over to Lenore Tawney's work. She's probably the most developed of these artists at this moment in '63, thinking about how you could remake sculpture or rethink weaving as a form of sculpture. And so these are pieces that have been loom woven with open warps that can be manipulated, and they're designed to be shown in the round, and they're twisted in space. She referred to them as woven forms, which is where the exhibition title comes from. One other installation photo here on the left, and then on the right, a color image of this piece by Dorian Zaki, which is in the Museum of Art and Design's collection. It's a shaped tapestry, and it's called Woman Emancipated from 1960, which is really fascinating. It's probably the earliest feminist work that I know of that is in fiber. And then a couple of other installation shots. Another example of this piece by Claire Zeisler, which was also illustrated in the catalog, that is like a gauze weave with these kind of hanging tassel-like elements. There's a shaped sculpture titled Dog by Alice Adams, which is made on a tapestry loom on the rear, and then this small freestanding piece by Sheila Hicks, which is a coiled basket. And I'm just going to jump forward a tiny bit and show you where some of these artists are going to go within a few years with much more large-scale, ambitious work. So Sheila Hicks on the left and Claire Zeisler on the right. The year after her trip in '65, Amaral had created new work that was an exploration of textiles as hanging objects in space. These works, like some of those highlighted in Woven Forms, share an ambition to experiment with thread while still working within the confines of the rectilinear loom. So I'm showing you one example from '65, interlaced in white and turquoise, and then Amaral with a number of these pieces from this time period. On the right, I'm showing you one of the best-known examples from 1966. And then, like the others, this was made on a loom with what's called a split warp. And this split warp allowed Amaral to manipulate her threads by dividing and rejoining them, passing them under and over one another, and then integrating these wrapped cords. And then on the left, I'm showing you an exhibition of the works in 1966. It was referred to as the TAB, or TAB Studio Gallery. In '65, Amaral opened an additional creative enterprise, a design studio that produced hand-woven and knotted rugs with another designer, Pauline Samper de Bright, Tapetes Amaral Bright, so TAB for short. They produced, as far as I can tell, Christina might know in more detail, high-pile hand-knotted rugs as ria, like in a Swedish shag rug style that was very popular at the time. So you see that there. And then there's another exhibition in Caracas in '66. And you see the wide sampling of different kinds of experiments that are taking place in her studio as she's working out these new directions. Also in 1966, Amaral was visited by another fellow Cranbrook weaving alum and textile designer, Jack Lenore Larson, who invited her to show her new work at his New York design studio in 1967. Larson probably would have seen the TAB show during his visit, and he showed, I can identify at least these two works among several others in New York City. So the white and turquoise, interlaced white and turquoise, and then double weave in white, black, and gramote from '65. During her trip to the US that year for that show, she would also teach at the Penland School of Crafts in Penland, North Carolina, and the Haystack Mountain School of Crafts in Deer Isle, Maine, placing her squarely within the North American Fiber Arts Network. And these two sites are part of a much larger network of non-degree granting art schools. They still exist today. The curriculum is largely featured around like master classes given by visiting artists. So if you were interested in working in these materials, you were not likely to go to, say, an art school. You would probably spend a summertime working with someone like Olga de Amaral, thinking about how you could push your work further. So from this point on, 67, or yeah, mid to late 60s on, Amaral's career expanded rapidly and into additional new contexts that demanded shifts in scale and abstraction. And these new contexts and the works she produced for them radically challenged longstanding, seemingly immovable boundaries separating art from craft. For instance, in 1967, her work was accepted into the third International Tapestry Biennial in Lausanne, Switzerland. I'm showing you just the poster from the third annual on the left, and then an installation shot showing Amaral's interlaced in black, white and black from 1966 on the right-hand side of that shot. Let me just say a little bit about this organization. The Lausanne Tapestry Biennial was inaugurated in 1962 by the Swiss-based Center for Ancient and Modern Tapestry, sometimes goes by CITAM. Tapestry at this time was still regarded as a form of wall decor and craft. And for this organization, the goal was to revive European, especially French, tapestry through commissions to avant-garde artists, and that was to raise its status. So when the biennials began, exhibitors had to follow very strict parameters in terms of style and size. So for instance, the works had to be tapestries. That is, they had to be woven on a tapestry loom. They had to be produced as a flat weave and used as a wall hanging. They had to be pictorial in style, and they had to be based on a division of labor between the artist who designed the composition to scale and a weaver or a studio responsible for executing it on the loom, with those weavers more likely than not remaining anonymous. This is an example of what that kind of traditional tapestry would have looked like. This particular piece was in the first biennial in 1962. It's attributed to the artist, the French artist Marc Saint-Saëns. It's titled La Musique. So you can kind of get the feel for the classical style of this. Now, this phenomenon, what was referred to as the industry of art tapestry, was entirely absent from the American studio fiber scene that Amaral was participating in. But by the third biennial in 1967, the rules had been relaxed and the floodgates opened to artists such as herself and her peers in the vanguard of the fiber art movement. And those would be artists such as Sheila Hicks, Magdalena Abacanovich, and others that I'll show you. The overlapping of these two worlds at the biennial, one split between an older model of a division of labor between artist and craftsperson that really preserved the hierarchical subordination of weaving to fine art, versus one where the artists executed their own work, worked improvisationally on and off the loom, was really never resolved over the course of the biennial's history. And so these two worlds sat in the same space. They have this overlap. And let me just go back to this installation shot from '67. So in other words, what happens is that you would have rooms that were devoted to traditional tapestry, and then rooms that would be labeled experimentation, like these, where you're seeing Amaral's work. And then I'll show you one other example from the '67 biennial on the left-hand side. It includes works by Sheila Hicks, the Croatian artist Jagoa Buik, and from what I can identify, the Polish artist Wojciech, Sadly Wojciech. And then on the right-hand side, the 1971 Lausanne Biennial, I'm calling out Deborah Rappaport, the fiber artist who's still based in New York to this day. She's wearing one of her tapestry pieces here. You can see how avant-garde this scene gets by '71. And Amaral is also exhibiting in this '71 version of the triennial, although I could not find, the biennial, I could not find an image of her work in it. Now, in 1968, Amaral was invited to represent Colombia at the World Crafts Council, a position she would hold for 2 years, and subsequently from 1970 to '78 as the Latin American representative. The meeting in 1968 took place in Lima, Peru, and I'm showing you part of a 7-page spread that documented the convening from Craft Horizons magazine. Her engagement with this organization, when it's mentioned at all, is usually relegated to a footnote, but it's more important than that, and once again points to Amaral's free movement between the realms of fine art, craft, and design. The World Crafts Council was a nonprofit founded by Aileen Osborne Webb, who was also the founder of the American Craft Council, the Museum of Contemporary Crafts, now the Museum of Arts and Design in New York, and the publication Craft Horizons, among other initiatives that sought to support artists working in underappreciated mediums and forms designated as craft. And in the US, in this time period, that would have meant textiles or fiber, ceramics, glass, enamel, wood, artist-made jewelry, and studio or bespoke furniture. The World Crafts Council was a late initiative of the late '60s, and she brought together artists working in these mediums and fields across the globe to discuss the different challenges facing them, whether they're working in fine art, tourist, indigenous, or design communities and markets. So Amaral's involvement in this organization is evidence of, again, of her very prominent place within the mid-century modern studio craft world in the US, supported by Aileen Osborne Webb. But also, she reported that the trip to Peru allowed her to visit museums with deep holdings of ancient Peruvian textiles. This stood out to me when I read that. The ancient textile traditions of the Andes were held in high regard by many artists of the international fiber art movement, especially in the US. This is a topic for an entirely another paper, but the passion surrounding Andean textiles was inculcated in various ways through weaving courses, publications, and museum collections in the US, starting in the late '30s and '40s. And the work stood out as a model of material intelligence and high aesthetic achievement for contemporary weavers and fiber artists. I mentioned the existence of the fiber art vanguard at the Lausanne biennials that included Amaral. In 1969, this vanguard made up the bulk of the checklist for an important international group exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York titled Wall Hangings. I'm showing you the cover here of the catalog. It's co-curated by Jack Lenore Larson and Mildred Constantine. And Larson, you recall, had shown Amaral's work in '67, and he owned the Amaral work that would go into this exhibition. Just show you a couple of installation shots here. Great representation of this vanguard that I'm talking about. On the left-hand side, a work by Magdalena Abakinovic. Further to the rear, again, the Croatian Jagada Buik. On the right-hand side in the foreground, American Sheila Hicks. Behind her, the Swiss artist Francois Grossin. That is Eva Jarozinskaya, mispronouncing that, but in the middle, Lenore Tawney, two works on the right-hand side, and then the Polish artist Wojciech Sadli. This is the piece as it was exhibited, Amaral's piece in the catalog on the left, originally called Orange Weaving, and today interlaced in green and orange from 1966. It's in the Denver Art Museum collection. Now, the following year, in 1970, Amaral's solo exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Crafts opened. Again, that's the Museum of Arts and Design today. This exhibition focused on her woven walls, a new series of large, densely constructed works made of woven elements that have been plaited or braided together into loops meant to be experienced in the round. The works exhibit a muscular, highly physical, and haptic sensibility formed by these woven bands and wrapped elements that are designed to be additive, which allows, in theory, infinite scalability, which becomes more and more important to work. And anyone actually exhibiting in these large-scale international shows or the tapestry biennials, because the demand was for extremely large, ambitious work. This is a slide, so it's a bad reproduction from a slide of the installation at the Museum of Contemporary Crafts, which originally was on 53rd Street. Today, the museum is on Columbus Circle. Two examples of works that were in the show that are in Mad's collection. The year before, some of these works were shown in Bogota in 1969. You see an example or a photograph from that installation here. Another landmark international exhibition that included Amaral took place in 1971. Titled Deliberate Entanglements, the exhibition was curated by Bernard Kester for the University of California in Los Angeles, the art gallery there. It was part of a citywide series of exhibitions, plus a symposium that focused on ancient Peruvian and Andean weaving and its influence on contemporary fiber artists. Amaral was part of the group show at UCLA and the symposium, where she spoke alongside Sheila Hicks and Junius Bird, who was the curator of the American Museum of Natural History in New York and the leading expert on the subject of Andean textiles in North America. So the catalog lists her as showing woven walls 76, 77, and 78, which I think could probably be any number of pieces. So I wasn't able to identify those. Just this detail appears in the catalog. There was a large 10-page spread of the exhibition that appeared in Craft Horizons. This just gives you a feel for the immense sort of organizing effort that went into this series of exhibitions across southern Los Angeles or southern California. So on the left-hand side, the installation shot with a Claire Zeisler, this coiled Claire Zeisler piece in the front. On the top of the middle slide, there's, let's see, there is a basket from an exhibition called Indian Uses of Native Fibers at the Southwest Museum, which is now the Autry Museum in LA. In the center, Peruvian weaving from a show of Andean garments at Los Angeles County Museum, and a Japanese basket from an exhibition titled Basket Statements that was at San Fernando Valley College Gallery. You see below that, Magdalena Abakinovic installing an installation with rope that took over the entire gallery at the Pasadena Art Museum where she was showing. And then on the right, the closing interactive program where the public was invited to come utilize these materials and build their own structures. That show traveled to Utah Museum of Fine Arts, the Palace of the Legion of Honor of San Francisco, Portland Art Museum, and the Vancouver Art Gallery. And wall hangings, I should mention, also traveled to 11 venues. So you begin to get the picture at this point, like there's just a profusion of exhibitions. I'm showing you some of the catalogs here, and then on the left, a huge number of publications as well. Some of them more serious than others. You could also find examples of this fiber art vanguard in books that were made for more of the DIY market. It's interesting to think of Amaral's work circulating within those popular communities as well. Now, so overall, what you're looking at, or what I've tried to show, is like work at this time in fiber was of a very ambitious scale in materials that are historically outside the bounds of fine art, but used in really new, innovative ways, and that radically departed from the conventional norms of sculptural permanence or defined shape. In other words, it was everything that gave sculpture an edge in the period, and yet the work featured in these exhibitions, made in fiber or promoted in these publications, and others like it, still fell flat with the American critical establishment. I'm just going to go back to, I want to point out that the Bogota exhibition of the woven walls is also a good example of sort of the spread outside of North America of this work into different museums and venues. Now, let me just go back to wall hangings here and this kind of disappointing response from the American art critical establishment regarding this work. So the curators of wall hangings at MoMA argued, quote, "Developments in weaving have caused us to revise our concepts of this craft and view this work within the context of 20th century art. These weavers are not part of the fabric industry, but of the world of art." So they're very emphatic about that. Now, these claims notwithstanding, this show was received with real ambivalence. To critics, fiber art was described as not living up to the intellectual standards of high art or falling into another world somewhere between art and applied design. So for instance, the reviewer, which happened to be the artist Louise Bourgeois, wrote in Craft Horizons that the works in the show, quote, "rarely liberate themselves from decoration," end quote. So, and so you have to think about the very pejorative connotations of the term decoration or the decorative at this time as being the opposite of art in the history of modernism. And this was hugely disappointing to the curators who had hoped in part to legitimate this new work in fiber as sculpture rather than some variation or extension of weaving as a form of interior decor. Bourgeois went on to say, quote, "A painting or a sculpture makes great demands on the onlooker at the same time that it is independent of him. These weaves, delightful as they are, seem more engaging and less demanding. If they must be classified, they would fall somewhere between fine and applied art," end quote. So perspectives like this on textiles, weaving, and thread were still really locked into a constellation of associations that related to women in the domestic sphere or applied craft or a furnishing that's tethered to an architectural scheme. And so it positioned work like that highlighted in wall hangings and other exhibitions as irrelevant to high culture. Amaral's 1974 solo exhibition at the prestigious Andre Emmerich Gallery in New York faced similar withering criticism. I'm showing you the cover of that catalog and then a detail of a densely matted sculpture, which was exhibited under the title Bound Vines at the time and is now known as Adherence. Writing for Art International, critic Phyllis Durfner concluded, quote, "She seems to be looking for a textual equivalent of visual abstraction, though abstraction designed for the sense of touch doesn't appear to be a very rich possibility," end quote. This is also a very common reaction at the time, and it's not unrelated to Bourgeois' comments about the work in wall hangings. And it hinges on the position that painting and sculpture appeal to the eye, that is, the mind. In Bourgeois' language, these mediums place an intellectual demand on the viewer. Fiber, on the other hand, is really presumed to be working on another level, the realm of the haptic or the physical, and was thus an inferior aesthetic experience within the modernist art world that exclusively privileged the cerebral encounter with a work of art, associating with intellectual rigor as opposed to, say, physical sensation. A couple of other images from works that were in that Andre Emmerich show. Beginning in 1973, Amaral began working on large-scale architectural commissions made for U.S. corporate sites, reconnecting her to the fields of design and architecture. The grandest of these was completed in 1967, commissioned by John C. Portman for his Westin Peachtree Plaza Hotel in Atlanta, Georgia. Showing you a detail here on the right, you can see the richness of the color palette in two panels that are in the exhibition. I'm just going to conclude by saying it's very easy to write a work like this off as a regression into the decorative, wall decor, or the subordination of the textile to an architectural scheme. And critics of fiber art at this time had no problem doing this. But from our perspective today, I really think you can see this as another overlapping context, that between art and architecture or design that Amaral was very successful in bringing together in her practice. The position of craft as a lesser practice inferior to the fine arts relies on several binaries, such as amateur versus professional, material or technique-based versus idea-based, applied versus autonomous, or decorative versus expressive. Amaral's work, along with that of her fiber art peers, complicated, scrambled, and deflated these binaries, whether the art world was ready for it or not in the 1960s and 70s. Today, there's an art historical reappraisal going on of materials like fiber, techniques such as weaving, plating, or knotting, and unconventional exhibition contexts. These things were once repressed. They're being looked at it again as a kind of alternative modernism. And it's partly that allows us to enjoy this renewed attention, long overdue, to artists such as Amaral. And her story provides, I think, some important perspective on where we are at the moment in an art world that is catching up to the complexities of her work and career and those of her peers working in fiber, a medium that was once perceived as alien, threatening even, to establish horizons of understanding what could count as art with a capital A. Thank you.